Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bits in between.
Welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. It has to be said that every episode is a treat this year in 2023, because I've got to admit, I haven't done anywhere near as many episodes this year as I really wished I'd done. In fact, this one that we're recording today is number 11. So by the end of the year, I'll have done basically one a month, which is kind of half my usual target. However, given what's going on this year, then please do forgive me. But rest assured, for 2024, we are planning the people that we want to engage with and how we're going to do that. And so we're going to be back on full steam by then. We aim to take all the interviews that we've done this year as well and get back to making the shorts and the engagement pieces. So hopefully we'll get to a position where the output across all the streams is working the way that it should. But in the meantime, after you've listened to this episode, maybe you've got time to think about that there is still time to submit for your abstract to Ergonomics and Human Factors 2024. You may not be aware that EHF, or Ergonomics and Human Factors, is the flagship conference from the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, and is a fantastic opportunity to hear the new work that's going on, both in research and in the applied domains. It's also fantastic for networking. So pop along to ergonomics.org.uk to find out more. If you want to hear a bit about what goes in the background, look in the back catalogue of this podcast, where we've had interviews with the conference organisers and some feedback from some of the previous conferences. So you've got an idea about what goes on and what you can get into. It's also really good to highlight that there's another new podcast on the circuit as well, another new ergonomics podcast. As Yet Untitled, that is the title, I'm not trying to be funny. It's a new podcast with Guy Osmond, along with Kim Hutton, and it's facilitated by Graham Coath. Find it in your podcast directory wherever you normally get your podcasts. If you want to hear a bit more about Guy Osmond and the work he does, go back to Series 4, Episode 2, where I chatted to him about working from home and the sort of things we need to be thinking about. It's a really lovely podcast. It's a more of a round table type approach to chatting, and I thoroughly recommend just going to have a listen and see what you think. Anyway, on to this episode. A lot of people in the human factors world, I guess, fall into one of two categories. You're either part of a human factors team, working as a larger company, working on specific projects, or you work as a consultant, advising others on how to implement human factors in their projects. And yes, I know it's not really as simple as that, is it? Because you've got teams working as part of large companies that go out and do their own consultancies, or you've got single people working on larger projects. But fundamentally, we've got this idea that there is a consultant. And what I really wanted to do was, we've kind of avoided that topic up to now. So I hope today's discussion may help us define it a bit. Today we're talking to Brendan Hazlett, a human factors consultant, and together we're hopefully going to chart these murky waters a bit. So without further ado, Brendan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So before we get into this whole contractor piece, this whole consultant piece, and how we're not all just out there to rob everybody of their money, I would love to find out a bit more about you and share your story. So what is your current role and what do you do on a day-to-day basis? What's the day job?
So I'm currently a principal human factors consultant for Abbott Risk Consulting, or ARC, as people may better know us. We tend to work as is the norm in consultancy across a number of different industries and different areas. But at the moment, I'm primarily a technical lead for human factors on a major nuclear decommissioning project, and tend to sprinkle in other works in other areas, other projects throughout the rest of the year as well to support that. So a little bits of rail here and there, working on the nuclear areas, etc. Really, but yeah, my primary focus at the moment is that nuclear decommissioning project.
So what does a typical day look like for you?
It can vary as is the word in consultancy. A lot of time we're holding workshops. Yesterday I was holding a task analysis and human error workshop to really sort of get into the nuts and bolts of a task, which obviously helps us in the design world. Then it can be attending sort of model reviews, design reviews. It can be writing substantiation documents, scope and strategy documents, management of issues logs, as I'm sure pretty much everyone in the world of human factors will be familiar with from their project work. But then also other bits and bobs in terms of managing the project itself, liaising with other stakeholders, the client, etc., to make sure that we're on track both in terms of spend and project program.
I'll say I feel a bit guilty asking that question because it's a question I hate being asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just find that one of the things I like about the human factors world is very few 2 days are the same, even if you structure it that way. So I do feel a bit guilty for asking you that one.
No problem.
So how did you get involved in human factors in the first place? Was it a first passion for you, or did you stumble upon it?
My passion at school, aside from sport, which is my passion outside of work, was product design. I really loved it. The whole through D&T at school into resistant materials at GCSE and then product design at A-level. That was my real passion. I knew I wanted to do something in that area. So I applied for a product design engineering course, which was called Product Design Manufacture at Loughborough University, which included a foundation year for anyone without a maths A-level. So I started that. It became pretty clear to me pretty quickly that that probably wasn't going to be what I wanted to do, mainly due to the amount of maths and pure maths, which has never been a real passion of mine. So I applied to change course to industrial design, and then got a phone call from the English tutor. I've forgotten the name entirely, but they offered me the course of ergonomics there and there on the phone, and then said, although I'll need to know within the hour if that's okay. So I had a very hurried hour of Googling ergonomics. Obviously, I'd heard about it in my product design A-level a little bit, but a bit of there and then decision to go for it. And I often describe it as best accident, I guess, that I've ever come across. It's something that I didn't apply for initially. I hadn't come across in that much detail. But I've loved the career I've fallen into.
So that's brilliant. When you had that opportunity to, was it an opportunity or a dictation? I don't know.
Yeah.
To go and do ergonomics or have the opportunity to do that, and you went and searched. What did you go and search for? What did you find? What was your initial impressions?
Well, like I mentioned, obviously having come across it a little bit in the very physical type of ergonomics, in terms of using anthropometrics in my project. Yeah. That was the only kind of thing I had in my head. So they're the sort of things I look for, and then put two and two together that I could still do the design work. It'd just be from that from viewpoint, which was something that interested me. I did come across other bits and bobs in that search in terms of things like noise and vibration and the environmental ergonomics, but really obviously learned way more about that on my first few days at Loughborough.
And this is possibly an unfair question. I can't believe I'm doing two unfair questions within the first segment already. From that initial almost burst of, if you could let them know within an hour or whatever, or within a day of saying that, did it live up to your expectations or not? How did that feel about? Because you kind of thrown into it. You must have liked it more long term now because you're still in the job. But
yeah,
what was the initial reaction like?
Yeah, definitely. I found it really exciting because, like I said, it was kind of nice to just be in the deep end. Really, no real preconceptions of what to expect or what I was going to come across. So, like I said, when I discovered the whole world of it beyond the physical side and the environmental side and everything else that came with it, and the more psychology based side that we learned about in our first couple of years, it's absolutely something that lived up to my expectations and more, really.
Cool. Okay, I guess it's not a fair question because you wouldn't have really said the other way, but never mind.
Yeah.
So you're now a shiny graduate out of Loughborough. You've got the course under your belt. What was the path that took you from there to where you're at now?
Well, my first experience of the working world was my placement year. So during my degree, I did a year at Aston Martin Lagonda in Gaydon, in Warwickshire, which was a really great experience. A lot of people still ask me about it now. I did a lot of growing up in that year on a personal and professional level, and learned a lot. in the sort of application of ergonomics rather than just the sort of theoretical side. As much as I enjoyed it and really, wouldn't change a thing about my time there, I did also realise that maybe consultancy was a bit more where I wanted to go into, just because obviously the role at Aston Martin was within a couple of factories and very much focused on that, whereas I was quite keen, especially as you mentioned, a shiny new grad, to go into the working world and get as much experience of different areas as possible. So that was why I applied for the role at Atkins, which I was fortunate enough to get into the grad scheme there. So did my first 5 years, just under 5 years of my career at Atkins. The first 3 of which were on the grad scheme there. So as well as the great experience I had there in terms of the projects I was on and the team I worked with, being on the grad scheme there as well, and all the sort of additional support that came with that, being one of a large pool of graduate intake, really sort of got me off on a springboard. So I'm sure I'll come to it later on, but yeah, some of the projects I was working on in those first few years really sort of filled that requirement, as I had for doing loads of different stuff on different projects, different industries, different applications, etc., and sort of set me up for the future really. Within that 5 years, I did 6 months in France working for EDF on Hinkley Point C project as seconded from Atkins, which again was a real drop in the deep end. I think we won the contract on the basis that I said I could speak French because I had a French A level. But having had my first hour and a half in the office, I realised I couldn't speak much French. So quickly set about rectifying that, and so I could do most of the work. But it was obviously sort of a UK context project, so mostly in English, but sort of French for the more sort of social conversational side. So after 5 years at Atkins, did a year at Arcadis, pretty much just on rail work, sort of workload assessment majority, and then had the opportunity to move to ARC. So I was approached by Pete Gibson, former colleague, who got in touch on LinkedIn and just sort of sold the company to me and the ethos of ARC, and working in a sort of smaller team and the sort of family environment that they build here and they sort of stick towards, and sort of flat structure. And I was just really keen to go for that. It just sounded like a really good next step in terms of picking up my responsibility a bit more, sort of being 6 years into my career and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I ended up where I am now.
Fantastic. So that you mentioned that a lot of people ask you about that first placement with Aston Martin. How formative was that for you? I mean, what did they throw you into a whole range of human factors stuff? What sort of stuff did they have you doing?
So I think it may have changed now, but at the time you were the only ergonomist on site across their 2 sites. So there's a bit of a carte blanche really in terms of what you could do. There was established methods that they used. They used a method called the Sue Rogers muscle fatigue analysis tool that I'm sure you've come across, to assess the postures of their workers across all the different, I think there was 400 at the time, working stations to assemble the car from nuts and bolts through the paint shop and trim shop into, onto the car that takes the road. So yeah, as I mentioned, we use that tool. We use other tools from the HC like the art tool and Reba, etc. So yeah, the day job there was to sort of do those assessments on each working station, as well as training up human factors champions, as they were called at the time, to do the assessments as well. And then when anything was highlighted as a risk factor or an issue, to work with engineering teams to overcome those. So it was more about the assembly of the car rather than the actual design of the car as such. So yeah, that was the remit there really. But it was like I mentioned, it was very much in the deep end. But I mean, that's kind of how I like things, just being able to get my teeth into it and really sort of get stuck in.
Yeah. But you sort of said that gave you an idea that you actually didn't want to necessarily do that in-depth work. You wanted to go down the consultancy side. Did you think that or do you think that, given your experience, then everybody who's going through their ergonomics training should go and do that type of activity just to get an idea about how the work's really done?
I couldn't recommend doing a placement year first and foremost enough. I think obviously the opportunity to, in the middle of your degree, to go and do get some work experience, stand on your own 2 feet, while also being in the context of a placement student, so you can use that as a bit of a get out of jail free card if you need to, is something that I would highly recommend. In terms of what we did there, like I mentioned, it was very much boots on the ground assessment. So again, in terms of going into what I went into consultancy and what I do now, it was a great grounding for that in terms of actually getting out there with an assessment method, talking to people, building relationships, and actually formulating a result to that assessment.
Brilliant. I always get. I was quite keen to understand people's engagement with them, because I've certainly seen some placements happen where you sort of give the young unwitting student the literature review to do, or that. And I think there's clearly huge value in making sure that you make that work as rich for the student as well as it is for the company. So it's really interesting to hear your feedback. I think what we're going to do now, we're just going to take a quick break, and then we're going to get into the main topic, and we're going to rip this idea of consultancy apart and see what it's about.
Sounds
so
good.
We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back. Today we're talking to Brendan Hazlett about the world of human factors consultancy. So, Brendan, in your experience, what does it mean to be a human factors consultant as opposed to just being a member of a team?
Yeah. So, from my experience, being a consultant is a requirement to have a good grasp of a wide range of fundamentals and techniques without necessarily being a specialist in one, which you may be in other roles, sort of especially academia, etc. And just sort of a confidence and application to apply those to a range of projects, a range of applications that come in, really. I think, as well as that, the sort of more personal / professional attributes as well that you require for it is just sort of being happy to talk to people, being happy to be seen as the sort of expert, I guess, in inverted commas, in the room who's come in for that specific purpose, to deal with the problem or to conduct further assessment. So yeah, that's what I see the role of consultancy. I'm sure we'll get onto it again later on, but I guess if a client brings you in to do that role, then they expect you to hit the ground running and do it. So having the confidence and the knowledge to apply those techniques from the outset, and sort of get to the result they're looking for.
I guess, you do sort of highlight a bit there. It's that whole piece. I think people might be put off by the fact that you are going in there and professing to be the expert about all things human factors, and you might be on your own, or you might be a couple of you, but generally you're a low number of representation. Were you not? You said that you wanted to be a consultant from early on. Did you not find that intimidating?
I guess it would be easy to, and in certain situations, absolutely the case, I would say. I think it's probably a fine balance between coming across proficient and confident in what you know, but also sort of admitting your vulnerabilities, especially if you're in a room with operators on a nuclear site, say, or likewise in a rail context. Just explain to them, look, I'm here to set the session. I'm confident in the method we're using. I've used it before. However, I don't know anything about your world. I've never operated the plant. I've never done this or that. So that's why I need you on board. That's why I need you to help me. And likewise, likewise when you're delivering it, in terms of your deliverables, you need to be confident and clear in what you can offer and the results you come to, while also admitting that some of it may be based on assumptions or maybe based on information that you've received anecdotally and stuff. So I think it's a fine balance between those two aspects.
What do you think are those key skills? It's not just knowing your craft, because obviously we know how to do a task analysis. We know the basic skills. But what do you think those skills or characteristics are that set a consultant aside from somebody who just maybe works as part of a larger human factors team?
I think, like I said, it's a personal side. I think is what I would say. And we often joke sort of when recruiting that most of the sort of techniques and tools and stuff you can sort of learn or be taught, but you need someone who's happy to, like I mentioned, walk into a room and claim to be someone who's leading the session, or claim to be an expert in a method or know their stuff, like I said. So it does require a bit of confidence. It does require a little bit of application in that manner. But again, being quite affable and being quite, have an ability to build those relationships to allow that to happen. And I think also, working in the context of consultancy, you have to make sure that you meet the needs of the client and build those relationships and hopefully lead to further work.
Yeah, I think the bit that you mentioned around, which I got to admit I use myself a lot, is that being able to go into the room and put the users almost at ease that you're not there to tell them their job. Because if we were the ideal nuclear operator or pilot or whatever it was, then we'd be doing that because it's better paid than what we do. We know our skills, but we're using them. They're the experts in what it is that they do.
Yeah.
And it sounds an obvious thing to say, but I think a lot of people miss that. The fact that you're just going in, you're trying to learn from them. Yeah,
100%. I think especially some of the mistakes I made as a sort of fresh-faced graduate, like I said, is walking in somewhere with a shirt and tie and polished shoes and a clipboard, on a site probably isn't the way to go about it. You're going to have people naturally being suspicious of that and thinking, who's this 22-year-old who's coming here and trying to tell me what to do. I think going in, being relaxed, trying to build a relationship first and foremost before you really get into it. However you need to do that, and try and get them to trust you, I guess. Because rightly so, they're going to be suspicious and not wanting to be told what to do by some young upstart, I guess.
Yes. So you mentioned you worked across quite a number of domains, nuclear, rail. What are the similarities and the differences that you found working across a number of different domains?
I think what I found, so like I mentioned, sort of bedrock of my career has been rail. So the first sort of 3.5 years was majority rail at Atkins. Did the year at Arcadis. So my sort of, I guess, fundamentals were in rail. So moving into nuclear and other spheres, I think it takes a little while to realise that it's a lot of the time it's the same skills, the same fundamentals, the same tools that you're using, just often with a different name or different terminology. So I mentioned things like an issues log, or an issues and assumptions register, etc. It's done in the same way in terms of identifying an issue, finding recommendations, allocating an action owner. It's all the same stuff. It's just different terminology and different terms. Fundamentally, I mentioned before about sort of physical ergonomics and environmental ergonomics. Pretty much any project you work on, you need to get a grasp of that. People need to be able to fit into the spaces. People need to be able to, work there safely in the context of what they're doing. In terms of, ventilation and lighting, etc. They need to be adequately protected in terms of PPE, but also that has other things like space requirements. So a lot of the time, that's exactly the same across across the industries you've got working, you're fundamentally going to be looking at a user or an operator working in a space, and they need to be able to fit there comfortably and work comfortably in the context as far as they can. I think in terms of differences that I found working in rail, a lot of the time these users consider sort of customers as well as staff. Station users, sort of persons of restricted mobility. There's a lot more of that sort of aspect, whereas I guess working in the nuclear world, it's pretty much just operators and maintainers that are on, well trained and well sort of swept to be on a nuclear site, and they know the way around the place. So I guess you're probably dealing with a few more unknowns in terms of personnel sort of actions. I guess the psychology side of it in the rail world. But other than that, it's fairly similar. You're still dealing with a bunch of stakeholders, and you've got to meet all the requirements.
I mean, I guess that's right, isn't it? Because you're trying to, no matter what the domain is, the toolbox is largely the same.
Yeah.
You're pointing around about, yes, we might call it different things in different domains because the way it's come up, but a task analysis is a task analysis. We recognize it for what it is.
Yeah.
But then I guess you just got to keep on top of that terminology as well.
Yeah.
Which can be, I don't know about you, but I can find that a challenge at times.
Absolutely. I think having like I said, having the 3 or 4 years in rail and getting a good grasp of acronyms and what everything meant and the names that use of different design stages, then to go into nuclear and try and learn them all over again. Yeah. Which was, again, like I said, the same tools with a different name or a different acronym, or the different stages called something different altogether. It did take a little while, and that can even vary across projects and stuff. But yeah, it's something you've got to get used to.
So, from a very personal perspective, you mentioned you wanted to be that consultant. What have you got out of it? Do you think, specifically by being a consultant, what that you perhaps wouldn't have got if you'd gone down a different route?
I think just purely that diversity work. I'm sure that happens with the roles. I'm sure people who work across the sort of HR spectrum, get a diversity in what they do. But I think just the opportunity to go into different settings and try and apply the same thing and build those relationships is what it is really. So for example, my first job that we won at Atkins was for a watchmaker, doing a assessment of operator posture, which was very similar to the work I did at Aston Martin previously. We did the similar sort of thing on sort of check-in desks at London airports. So again, very similar tools and techniques, but a very different context, very different setting. And then moving into rail, again, this is within my first sort of few years, looking at station design across a number of stations across London, workload assessment, depot design, using CAD as well to do that sort of thing. So I guess that was the sort of real takeaway from my first years in my career, and I'm getting out of it what I wanted, and then into now what I do in nuclear. So I mentioned things like substantiation reports, which is essentially just pulls everything together in terms of the physical side, the environmental side, the psychology, the human error analysis. So yeah, I guess in a nutshell, one of those reports is what I'm lucky enough to do, what in my career in terms of working in different spheres.
So, without divesting client confidentiality or anything like that, what's been the most interesting project you've been involved in? What's the one or maybe two projects that you go back and think about, go, wow, that was amazing?
I'll probably mention three. So the first one was Crossrail. Very early into my first couple of years at Atkins, I worked alongside my colleague John Ryder, who's sadly no longer with us, but was just about the sort of best person to learn from I could have had back then, both in terms of teaching you on the job, but also sort of giving you the freedom to make your own mistakes. So yeah, we worked on 13 station designs across sort of across rail sort of Essex aspect, the Northeast Spurs it was called. That was just super interesting. So as I mentioned, you didn't only have to think about things like maintenance and the staff on the site, although a lot of it was sort of ticket office design, but you had to think about all the different users at the train station, how they might operate, how they'd evacuate in terms of fire, whether that happened on the platform, on the train, or it's super interesting, and also had so much sort of public scrutiny on it as well. People are so interested in what's going on and want to know about things. So as well as the sort of nuts and bolts of it, it also had to look good. Working with architecture teams to make it look shiny and new and attractive, and colour schemes, and having to do that sort of buy off between what looks the best as to what performs the best, or other demands like what might be the most cost effective, etc. So that's one that I go back to a lot, because it was one of my first projects, and also one that I used so many different skills on and applied so many different sort of considerations to. The one in France I mentioned, so that was Hinkley Point C. I worked on in France. So again, a lot of public interest in that project. Having to apply everything I'd learned to that point to the project to a team of engineers in France who didn't really have any understanding of ergonomics and human factors. Trying to sort of teach them why it was important and why they should be interested. Not just that I'm, the sort of 25-year-old who's from England who's trying to tell them what to do. Trying to encourage them that it would improve the project and would save rework down the line if we got things right first time. And like I mentioned, obviously sometimes doing that in French or attending meetings in French was tricky, but sort of had enough to get by and understand what was going on. And then, as I mentioned now, at ARC, the decommissioning project that I'm lead on, because as I mentioned, it sort of pulls together all different aspects, often in one document, to sort of explain why we've got confidence that the operators can do certain things in certain ways, or why maintainers can maintain things effectively, but also having the opportunity to lead it as well, both from a sort of project management side and in terms of sort of mentoring and supervising more junior colleagues. There's been something that I've really enjoyed and really sort of relished.
Cool. Certainly that whole piece about it, I find it hard enough to do human factors in English, never mind trying to deliver it in French as well. That must have been a challenge. Yeah,
I'm certainly not for 1 second claiming that I was anywhere near fluent. I'm sure if anyone that I work with over there hears this and hears me claiming that, then I'll probably get some messages. But I was certainly capable to have a conversation, especially after a beer after work, and I was sort of competent enough to get by in the office. Again, even just to build those relationships with people on a coffee break.
Yeah.
Talking French, so then you get back to your desk and you can talk in English. Sort of building that sort of trust and camaraderie, I guess, which is important in so many projects.
That's quite, that language barrier is quite a significant challenge anyway. But what do you think that's the biggest challenge you've faced in doing what you've in your career so far, or have there been other challenges?
That was certainly a challenge. Like I mentioned, going over there as the embedded HF specialist, again, that fine balance of claiming you're the specialist, and also being affable enough to say, but not in what you do, sort of thing, and trying to get their buy into what you do. I think a lot of the time as well, not only in that context, but especially in the rail context as well, sort of getting people to understand what human factors is and what ergonomics is, and why they should trust you or even give you the time of day. In the past, I've sort of worked with people like trade union reps, etc., and trying to sort of persuade them that what you're doing will benefit them, and is of interest to them. You're not just there for the sake of it or for any malicious reasons. A lot of the time, I would say that's the challenge. But it's something I enjoy, because at the end of it, if you manage to make those relationships, then obviously you feel like you've really achieved something. But I think, just building those relationships with people, and also, people like project managers, persuading them your value, I guess, and why the cost associated with you is beneficial, and any delay to their project, why it's beneficial, and things like that. So I think that's been my biggest challenge, and probably will be until I retire.
I mean, certainly that piece around justifying the cost, because it's one of the things I talk about quite a lot, about the investment. So applying human factors is an investment, because it stops you having to fix things later on down the line. But that's often quite a challenge, isn't it? It's to try and get people to invest early on, rather than trying to fix it down the line. But it's a tough one to sell.
I mean, I think I'm very lucky. Well, we're very lucky in what I work in, that obviously in the highly regulated industries, especially sort of nuclear and rail, and oil and gas, etc. The regulator obviously makes it very clear that human factors and ergonomics should be consulted. So there's an element of them having to speak to us. But I do think it's important that we do sort of sell the benefit as well, at sort of ground level. And also some of the projects I've mentioned previously, so the one at the watchmaker, some of the rail ones we've worked on, other sort of workspace design projects I've worked on. I really like it when we get a project where it's not as regulated, because then it's more about, it's purely about the benefit of what ergonomics can offer. As I mentioned before, I'm a big sport fanatic, and I really think there's an area to be tapped into in there. There's so much goes into it. You have football teams having throwing coaches, etc. There has to be an application of what we do, and that task analysis, and that sort of understanding the psychology of things, and trying to improve comfort and etc. and performance. There has to be more of a sphere in there for us to tap into to try and improve performance and improve comfort and perception, really.
So is this now the start of you going to tap up your favourite sports teams to try and get some human factors roles within them?
I'm sure if I could win some of that, I'm sure I could be very happy. I'm not sure it's something that we specialise in at the moment, so probably limited scope to do that, I think.
Somebody's got to be first.
Yeah.
That's been really, really insightful and really useful. What we'll do, we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll get back with the final three.
Okay, thanks.
Just before Barry gets to the final three, my name's Nick Rome. Let me tell you about this. Technology in our world is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and keeping up with what that means in the human factors world can be challenging. That's where Human Factors Cast comes in. Human Factors Cast is a weekly podcast that highlights and breaks down stories that are chosen by you, the Human Factors community.
New York State is giving out hundreds of robots as companions for the elderly.
Buttons in cars are safer and quicker to use than touchscreen.
A prototype just achieved a major milestone that actually fits the description of a flying car.
The show provides perspective based on experiences from different domains and different industries. We even cover some of the hottest conferences in the field. On this episode, we're recapping EHF, Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, Neuroergonomics Conference, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, UXPA International. Join me, Nick Rome.
And me, Barry Kirby.
Every Friday morning when Human Factors Cast drops on YouTube and your favorite podcast directory. And remember,
it depends.
And now I'm going to send it back over to Barry for the final three.
Oh, it makes me giggle every time. So let's get into these final three questions then. And we ask these questions of everybody who comes on, just as a bit of fun, really. If you've got a favourite book or a paper, have you got something that you go to repeatedly that is like your Bible? That can be either a technical book or it can be a fiction book.
In terms of the one that I used to sort of all the time, you mentioned sort of Bible. So Body Space by Pheasant Hazelgrave. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it. If not, they probably should be. In certain projects, applications, there's their own sort of client-based document, but fundamentally, it's all based on the aspects that are in there. So if there's no other guidance which sort of supersedes it, then that's the sort of one I go to. it's got me out of a few sticky situations in the past.
Fair enough. If you go back to your younger self and whatever age suits you, what advice would you give yourself?
I think probably just to be a bit patient. I'm sure some of my previous managers would agree. I like to think of myself as quite a ambitious person, but especially on that grad scheme I mentioned, just to sort of try and soak everything up from all the people you work with, people who are a bit longer in the tooth in the discipline, in the profession than you are. I think I was quite keen to get to the next step in terms of doing a bit more on my own, to being a bit more independent. So I think just sort of take the opportunity to circle that in, and let it sort of guide you in future career, I think.
And so finally, fast forward yourself to the end of your career. You're retiring. What would you like to be remembered for?
I think this is the trickiest one. So obviously you gave me a bit of the insight of what might be coming. I'm not really sure how to answer this, but having mentioned before that I think it's so important that you build those relationships in consultancy and human factors in general. You get in, you try and build that camaraderie so people want to work with you. So I'd like to think that people would that I worked with previously, as well as obviously thinking that I'm decent at what I do, is that I was nice to work with, and would work with me again. I would think. I'd like to think that was what I'd be remembered for.
Brilliant. Brendan, thank you ever so much for your thoughts and your insights today. Behind the scenes, we've had a couple of interruptions and postponements because of me getting house renovated and things like that. So thank you very much for bearing with me.
No problem.
If anybody wants to get in touch with you, talk about what they've heard today, how would they go about doing it?
I'd say LinkedIn's the best way. As I mentioned, as a sport fanatic, the social media is just full of sports. So I would say LinkedIn's the best way. I'm fairly keen at checking that and keeping an eye on what's going on. So I'm sure people can type in my name on there, find me.
Brilliant, and we'll make sure that your details are in the guest description as well. So thank you, Brendan. Really appreciate it, and thank you for watching and listening wherever you're consuming this information from. As ever, your feedback would be really welcome through whatever medium you're consuming this episode. Either comment below it or drop us any sort of feedback, direct message with your questions, comments, and whatever else feedback you want to give us. And we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.